Exeath held the strange rugged metal object in his three-fingered grasp, his long, sinewy limbs almost quivering with the sheer ridiculousness of it. "They call this a weapon," he muttered, feeling the hard chill of its surface bite into his skin, as if the tool was a creature with teeth. The AK-47, as the humans had named it, was something Exeath couldn't decide whether to laugh at or marvel over. "Ah, yes," he continued, casting a superior glance toward his two hired smugglers. They were squat, toad-like creatures from some murky, bog-covered planet he couldn't recall the name of. Unimpressive as they were, they had managed to snag him this human weapon, one of their prized killing machines, or so the tales went. "Tell me," he inquired, a sneer gracing his thin, pale lips. "Are humans really as simple-minded as this? A metal stick that flings metal?" The smugglers exchanged uneasy glances. We don't really know, boss," the stouter of the two stammered. Their eyes darted, never staying still for long, clearly anxious to be on their way. No one in this galaxy cared to stand still around Exeath for too long, especially with his prickly reputation as a true evaluator for the egots, the ego-laden conquerors of the stars. "Yes, well," Exeath sniffed, adjusting his grip on the weapon. "It's amusing, to say the least." He let out a condescending laugh that echoed through the dingy, dimly lit cargo hold, a sound as thin and cold as the breath of a ghost. How these humans have managed to keep hold of any planetary dominion at all is a mystery. Hiding behind metal slingshots and primitive bravado. The smugglers, sensing the end of their meeting, exchanged relieved glances and fidgeted towards the exit, but Exeath was far from finished. His long, needle-like body unfurled as he rose, practically towering over the squat, fidgeting creatures. "No, no. If they're to be considered a real species, then it's my duty to relieve them of such illusions of strength." A week later, Exeath sat in his grand, throne-like command chair aboard the Aegis of Supremacy, a ship whose size could eclipse a human city. It glided smoothly through the vast, silent reaches of space, its black hull blending seamlessly into the cosmos as if it was carved from the fabric of the universe itself. Exeath had a plan. He would make a diplomatic visit to Earth, just a small, inconspicuous vessel landing near one of their quaint military installations, nothing to ruffle feathers. The humans wouldn't even see it coming. "All systems calibrated," his AI assistant reported, its smooth, metallic voice echoing in the quiet of the control room. "We are prepared for planetary descent, Master Exeath." Exeath adjusted his sleek, dark robe and leaned forward, his angular features set in a smirk. "Excellent." He stretched out a long, clawed finger, tapping the holographic controls before him. "I assume the atmosphere will offer no resistance to my presence?" "Correct, Master," replied the AI. "Earth's defense mechanisms are archaic. They will detect nothing more than an unusually large atmospheric entry." Exeath chuckled under his breath. A challenge indeed. Earth's so-called highly developed defenses had been a frequent subject of curiosity and mirth among the Egoteon circles. Stories of humanity's small-scale technology, jets, ballistic missiles, even their nuclear weapons, were laughable compared to what the Egoteon Empire wielded. A single scout ship could vaporize their strongest fortifications. So, with a smirk and a swirl of his dark cape, Exeath began his descent toward Earth. The ship slipped into the atmosphere like a shark sliding through water, silent and invisible. He selected a human military base on the outskirts of some landmass called Nevada. It seemed desolate enough, dry plains, barely any vegetation, and the occasional snake slithering about. "Coordinates locked. Prepare for landing, Master," the AI announced as the ship prepared for final descent. Exeath watched the view through the holographic display with an unimpressed eye. There were a few scattered concrete buildings, some vehicles, and a perimeter of fences topped with barbed wire. The base's inhabitants were already assembling, their squinty-eyed gazes turned toward the sky, unaware of their fate. As his ship lowered, a strange feeling crept over Exeath, a curiosity, not about these creatures, but about how he might manipulate them into yielding without a fight. They'd probably bow and scrape at the first hint of his technological superiority. The ship touched down with the faintest hum. Exeath took a deep breath, savoring the thrill of the conquest to come. With a swish of his robe, He strode down the ramp that extended from the ship's hull, his towering figure casting a long shadow over the humans who stood, rooted to the spot, watching him with a mix of awe and apprehension. Several soldiers, clad in their green uniforms, stood at attention. One stepped forward, a man in his mid-40s with a hard jawline and steely eyes. His voice was firm but polite as he spoke. "Identify yourself," he demanded, though his voice wavered slightly. Exeath resisted the urge to smirk. How utterly quaint. "I am Exeath of the Egots," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of an imperial proclamation. "A superior being, here to observe your kind." His tone was dripping with disdain. "I trust you will make yourselves useful." The humans exchanged uneasy glances. The lead soldier cleared his throat and responded, "Well, Mr. Exeath, we'd welcome any visitor who comes in peace. But you'll need clearance if you're coming onto a restricted site." Exeath blinked. He hadn't anticipated a negotiation. Didn't they understand his authority? He sighed, adjusting his stance to appear as imposing as possible. "Clearance," he drawled, feigning ignorance. "I am granting you clearance to behold a superior being in your midst." A few of the soldiers chuckled, but the lead officer's expression remained neutral. "You might be superior, sir, but here on Earth, we have protocols. You don't just waltz into a military base unannounced." He paused, studying Exeath with curiosity, almost as if assessing his weaknesses. "If you come in peace, let us follow procedure. If not, you'll be asked to leave." Exeath's eyebrows rose. The audacity. But a strange notion held him back from simply swatting them aside or forcing compliance. It was an unfamiliar sensation, and he couldn't place it. Was it caution? He shoved the thought aside and chose instead to press on with his condescension. "Fine," he said with a sigh, as if humoring a child. "Proceed with your protocols, but know that I am here to evaluate your kind. Should you fail to meet my expectations, the consequences will be grave." He allowed the threat to linger, enjoying the flicker of unease that passed through the human's face. But the soldier's reply was simply, "Noted, sir." Exeath found himself in a windowless room that smelled faintly of old coffee and sweat. A metal table with uncomfortable chairs dominated the center. This wasn't exactly the royal reception he had expected. Two more humans entered. One, a severe-looking woman with graying hair, introduced herself as General Harding. She cut right to the chase, eyeing him with something Exeath almost mistook for amusement. "We appreciate your visit, Exeath," she began. "You've requested to evaluate humanity. Let's clarify what exactly that means." "It is a privilege for your species," he replied, his tone tinged with arrogance. "I am here to decide if you are worthy of inclusion in our empire. We reward those who show potential and eliminate those who do not." General Harding raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. However, we're not exactly looking for inclusion in anyone's empire." Exeath laughed, a brittle, dismissive sound. "Resistance is pointless, General. My empire has conquered planets 10 times the size of yours." General Harding's expression didn't change. "We understand you're powerful," she replied coolly. "But tell me, what do you know about humanity?" Exeath hesitated. He had studied humans' weapons, their physiology, their limited technology. But something about her question gave him pause. "Enough to know that your species is primitive," he sneered. General Harding's lips twitched in a faint smile. "I see," she replied, leaning back in her chair. "And tell me, in all your experience with primitive species, have you ever seen one quite like ours?" "Frankly," he replied, "you all look quite similar. Bipedal, warm-blooded, hopelessly aggressive." "Good assessment," she acknowledged with a faint nod. "But have you ever met a species that, against all odds, managed to survive, even when outmatched?" Exeath scoffed. "What are you suggesting, General?" "I'm suggesting that while you might consider us primitive, there's something humans excel at. We adapt. We're relentless. It's our nature to face challenges head-on, regardless of who or what is in front of us." Exeath's smile faltered. He could feel the energy in the room shifting, a strange, invisible pressure mounting. General Harding was studying him with an intensity he hadn't expected. "Perhaps, Exeath," she continued, her tone soft but cutting, "instead of evaluating humanity by your standards, you should consider that we might not be so easy to conquer." There was a moment of silence as her words sank in, and for the first time, Exeath found himself unable to respond. Could it be that these humans had something he hadn't anticipated, a defiance that could match, or even withstand, his empire's might? No, he dismissed the notion. It was absurd. But something about her unblinking gaze unsettled him. The sense of confidence he had clung to now felt precarious, balanced on a knife's edge. Exeath's confidence wavered as he studied General Harding, her words echoing in his mind. It was disorienting. No species had ever made him second-guess his own power, his empire's superiority. But humans, it seemed, were a strange exception, fueled by defiance rather than fear. The general's expression hardened. "I'll be honest, Exeath. You're not the first visitor with big plans for Earth. But every single one of them underestimated us." "Underestimated," he scoffed, fighting back a prickle of doubt. "I assure you, General, the Egotion Empire is beyond anything you can imagine. Resistance will only make your inevitable defeat more unpleasant." But General Harding seemed unfazed. "We've survived plagues, disasters, and threats both from within and without. Humanity has a knack for finding ways to survive when the odds seem impossible. And for all your technological advances, I wonder if you know what it's like to be truly tested." Exeath scoffed. "The Egotion Empire is above tests, General. I have seen worlds fall at my command, civilizations crumble into dust." "Then perhaps," she replied with a faint smile, "you're the one who needs to be tested." Exeath stared, taken aback by her audacity. He was supposed to be the examiner here, the judge of humanity's worth. Yet here she was, flipping the script as if she were the one with the upper hand. "You're suggesting a test? And what, precisely, would you propose?" he asked, half amused, half curious. The general leaned forward, her gaze steady. "If you're here to judge humanity's value, then why don't you see how we respond to a crisis? We'll set the conditions, and you'll observe." A part of Exeath bristled at the idea. He wasn't some spectator here for amusement. But the thought of seeing humanity pushed to its limits intrigued him. "Very well," he replied, his tone laced with condescension. "Show me your resilience. I will give you this opportunity." The general gave a short nod. "Then it's settled. Tomorrow, we'll show you what humans can do under pressure." Exeath felt a surge of confidence, convinced this so-called test would only prove humanity's inferiority. But he wasn't prepared for the days that followed. The next day, Exeath was escorted to a remote area surrounded by towering mountains and dense forests. As he exited the transport vehicle, he noticed a group of soldiers preparing what looked like a field camp. He felt the usual disdain rise up, but he kept his composure, deciding to humor them. General Harding appeared at his side. "We've set up a controlled scenario. A simulated disaster. You'll observe how humans respond when faced with a sudden, overwhelming threat." "A simulation?" Exeath raised an eyebrow. "Your attempt to mimic a crisis hardly seems necessary. I could create a genuine one. Let's see if you're still interested in that after this exercise," she said with a wry smile. Exeath followed her to a viewing area where several monitors displayed live feeds from different parts of the camp. The simulated crisis, he quickly learned, was a mock alien invasion scenario, with drones mimicking enemy forces and civilians trained to act as refugees. It seemed primitive to him, but he was mildly curious nonetheless. The scenario began with an invasion warning blaring through the camp. The soldiers moved quickly, directing civilians to safety while setting up defenses. Exeath watched as young recruits, barely out of their teens, took up positions, their faces tight with determination. They were outnumbered, under-equipped, yet they moved with a coordination and focus that was unexpected. Exeath frowned. These soldiers, they lacked proper armor, advanced weaponry. How do you expect them to withstand a true invasion? Harding didn't answer directly. "Just watch." For hours, Exeath observed as the simulated crisis unfolded. Soldiers made split-second decisions, rescuing civilians from enemy fire, using strategy over brute force to hold their ground. He saw teams working together to patch up the injured, engineers rigging up makeshift defenses from whatever materials were on hand. They adapted, inventing solutions on the fly. And even when they were pushed to the brink, they never surrendered. As dusk fell, Exeath found himself reluctantly impressed. These humans were, by his standards, weak and frail, but they possessed a resilience he hadn't anticipated. They were fighting with everything they had, refusing to yield even when the odds were against them. It was almost inspiring. General Harding turned to him. "So, Exeath, what do you think?" "They exhibit a certain tenacity," he admitted grudgingly. "But it's ultimately pointless. Without proper technology, they'd be no match for even a single Egotion battleship." "Perhaps," she replied, "but they'd fight anyway." Exeath could hear the pride in her voice, and for the first time, he wondered if there was more to humanity than he had assumed. Perhaps this tenacity, this refusal to give in, was their strength. It wasn't something he'd seen in other species. "Tomorrow," General Harding continued, "we'll run a different scenario. You'll see more than just soldiers. You'll see humanity as a whole under stress." Despite himself, Exeath felt a flicker of anticipation. The following day, Exeath was led to a city on the outskirts of the desert. It was teeming with civilians, people of all ages, moving through the streets with a calm that belied the simulated threat hanging over them. For this test, drones would simulate an alien invasion on a much larger scale, affecting not just soldiers but civilians. Exeath stood on a rooftop, watching as the first drones appeared in the sky, swarming in ominous formations. Alarms blared, and people began to scatter. But as the simulated threat unfolded, he noticed something surprising: civilians didn't panic. Instead, they organized. He saw families gathering at designated safe zones, strangers helping one another to shelters. Emergency workers rushed to assist the injured, coordinating with military units to keep people safe. He watched as children were carried to safety by strangers, elderly people guided by young volunteers. The whole city moved as if it were a single organism, with everyone working toward a common goal. Exeath couldn't look away. The Egotians conquered worlds through fear, dividing their enemies and exploiting their weaknesses. But here, he saw strength in unity, an unbreakable bond holding these humans together even in the face of overwhelming odds. He'd never seen anything like it. Finally, the drones retreated, signaling the end of the simulation. The people cheered, embracing one another as the simulated danger faded. Exeath felt a strange sensation stir within him, something he couldn't quite define. It wasn't admiration, no, he was still an Egotion, after all. But it was respect. General Harding approached him, a knowing look in her eyes. "Do you understand now, Exeath? It's not our technology that makes us strong. It's our willingness to stand together, no matter the costs." Exeath glanced at her, his pride struggling against this new perspective. "I may have underestimated your species," he admitted slowly, each word feeling heavy on his tongue. "But this strength, it is born from necessity. You survive because you have no choice." "Perhaps," she replied. "But it's also because we choose to fight, to protect each other even when there's no hope. That's something no amount of technology can create." Exeath fell silent, her words sinking in. He had always believed strength came from power, from advanced weapons and sheer force. But here, he was witnessing a strength born from unity, from a shared resolve that transcended individual fears. It was a power he had never considered, one that couldn't be conquered. Exeath stood at the edge of the city, watching as the humans went about their lives, rebuilding after the simulated attack. He hadn't realized how much this test would affect him, and now, he couldn't shake the sense of unease. The general joined him, her posture relaxed but her gaze sharp. "So, Exeath, is the Egotion Empire still convinced of our inferiority?" He hesitated. The words formed in his mind, but they felt wrong. "Humans are unpredictable. You lack power but compensate with something else, something I cannot fully comprehend." General Harding smiled, her expression both triumphant and sympathetic. That's what every visitor underestimates. We're not the strongest or the most advanced species. But when pushed, we adapt. And that's the edge we have over most. Exeath looked out over the city, contemplating her words. In the Egotion Empire, strength is everything. We crush weakness, discard those who cannot fight. But here you fight even for those who cannot fight for themselves. She nodded. Because we see value in everyone, even the weakest among us. They each bring something unique to the table. Exeath looked at her, seeing the pride in her face, the pride of a species that refused to be anything but resilient. I came here to judge your worth, he said slowly, almost reluctantly. But instead, I find myself questioning my own beliefs. Harding's smile softened. Maybe that's the real reason you came here. To test yourself, not us. He scoffed, trying to mask the uncomfortable truth. Egotians don't question themselves. It is not in our nature to doubt our purpose. Perhaps that's why the Egotion Empire struggles to understand other species, Harding replied. You see yourselves as conquerors, but strength can take many forms. You've seen just one side of what makes a species truly powerful. Exeath was silent for a moment. So, what is the point, General? Why should I spare your world? Because we have something that even you, with all your power, do not possess, she said. Hope. The word lingered between them, heavy and meaningful. Exeath looked back at the city, its people rebuilding with a resilience that seemed endless. He didn't fully understand it, but he couldn't deny the feeling growing within him, a grudging respect, even admiration. Exeath returned to his ship that night, wrestling with a choice he had never expected to face. The decision should have been simple. Humanity was clearly inferior, a species with no technology that could stand against the might of the Egotion fleet. Yet, he hesitated. He accessed the ship's communication system and summoned his advisors. Their holographic images appeared before him, their expressions stern and expectant. Commander Exeath, one of them began, is Earth ready to join the Egotion Empire? Exeath hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He was expected to give a definitive answer, to judge humanity's worth based on their strength or lack thereof. And yet, everything he'd seen contradicted the easy answer he'd come prepared to give. No, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Earth is unique. They are not weak. They possess a different kind of strength, one that is difficult to measure but cannot be ignored. The advisors exchanged confused glances. Commander, you've never made such a statement about any other species. Are you suggesting they pose a threat to the Empire? Exeath shook his head. Not a threat, no. But I believe there is something we could learn from them, something that may even benefit our own empire. The advisors fell silent, and he could feel their disapproval even across the distance. It was unheard of for an Egotion commander to suggest that another species had anything of value to offer. But Exeath was resolute. He would not dismiss humanity so easily. Very well, Commander, one of the advisors said stiffly. We will inform the Emperor of your findings. But remember, your loyalty to the Empire must remain above all else. Exeath nodded, feeling a pang of conflict. He was loyal to his empire, he always had been. But now, he felt a strange kinship with the humans, a respect he hadn't anticipated. He ended the communication and sat alone in his quarters, contemplating what he had witnessed. Before leaving Earth, Exeath decided to meet with General Harding one last time. He requested an audience with her, and they met in the same room where they had first clashed. The general's gaze was steady as she faced him. So, Exeath, will the Egotion Empire invade Earth? He shook his head. No. I have seen enough to know that your people are not what I expected. There is strength in you that does not rely on technology or power. A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Does that mean you respect us? Exeath didn't answer directly. Perhaps. I am still an Egotion, and my duty is to my empire. But I will not condemn your people simply because you lack what we possess. She studied him for a moment. Then maybe, someday, the Egotion Empire and humanity can coexist peacefully. There's more to be gained from cooperation than conquest. He scoffed, though there was no real disdain in his tone. You think humans and Egotians could be allies? Why not, she replied. Maybe one day, you'll see that strength lies not just in power, but in understanding. Until then, you know where to find us. Exith inclined his head, a gesture of respect that felt both foreign and strangely satisfying. He left her standing there, her confident gaze following him as he returned to his ship. As the Egotion vessel ascended into Earth's atmosphere, Exith took one last look at the blue and green world below. Perhaps someday, he thought, their paths would cross again on terms not of dominance, but of understanding. Back on his homeworld, Exith submitted his report, detailing humanity's resilience, their defiance, and their unexpected strength. He received the usual questions from the Council, skeptical of his decision to spare Earth. But he stood firm, explaining that Earth was not yet ripe for conquest, that they were different. In the quiet moments after, he found himself returning to that strange feeling he had felt on Earth, a sense of admiration that defied his Egotion nature. It was something he could not ignore, something that lingered in his mind even as he resumed his duties. And though he might never admit it openly, he knew that Earth had changed him. He could not shake the memory of humans standing together in the face of insurmountable odds. Their strength derived not from might but from unity, from the very hope they carried within them. As he looked out across the stars, Exith wondered if perhaps, one day, his own empire would understand the strength he had seen on Earth. And until that day came, he would carry the memory of humanity with him, a quiet reminder that true strength was not so easily measured.